Welcome to Outside Views, where we take an in-depth look at the obstacles the UK would face if it ever were to apply for EU membership again. Brexit is increasingly regarded as a mistake, and many Britons now favour rejoining the EU, although that doesn't exist, it would be join again. But what would that actually mean? And today we continue and finish our BRITURN series, where we explore the challenges of the accession process. And in this episode we examine the final chapter 35, Other Issues. When discussing the prospect of the UK joining the European Union again, we must understand that there is no shortcut or special treatment for a former member. The UK would have to apply like any other country, and that means fulfilling the so-called Copenhagen criteria. These criteria demand stable democratic institutions, a functioning market economy, and the ability to adopt the entire body of EU law known as the acquis communautaire. Every applicant follows the same process, meaning this is not a negotiation in the way many would assume by just looking at the name of it. The EU does not bargain over its rules. The applicant country must align with them. Chapter 35 is, as I said, the final chapter in the negotiation process and covers issues that are not explicitly included in any of the previous chapters. And this means that it is often used to address specific concerns that arise during negotiations but do not fit neatly into any other category. And because of this, Chapter 35 is unique in that it varies widely depending on the country applying for membership. For the UK, this chapter could include unresolved issues from Brexit, transitional arrangements, or even new concerns that arise during negotiations. And one of the most significant aspects of Chapter 35 is that it is dealt with at the end of the negotiation process. And this means that by the time discussions reach this chapter, all other areas of EU law should already be aligned with UK policies, or the other way around, better said. However, this does not mean that Chapter 35 is a mere formality. In past EU accession processes, this chapter has sometimes been used to address politically sensitive issues that were too complex to resolve earlier in the negotiations. For the UK, this could mean finalizing agreements on the long-term status of Northern Ireland, transitional financial contributions, or specific opt-ins or opt-outs from certain EU policies, but no cherry-picking here again. That's not meant here. But one of the most obvious areas where Chapter 35 could apply to the UK is the issue of unfinished Brexit business. Although the UK and the EU signed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, it left many issues unresolved, particularly regarding Northern Ireland, the rights of UK citizens in the EU and vice versa, and continued regulatory divergence. If the UK were to join again, these measures would need to be addressed, and this could involve getting rid of the Northern Ireland Protocol. If they are a member again, then they are a member. And of course, the UK people would regain their rights as EU citizens. But another potential issue under Chapter 35 is transitional measures. Joining the EU again is not an instant process, and there would likely be a need for transitional agreements to allow time for full implementation of EU law. For example, the UK might need a phased approach to reintegrating into the customs union and single market as businesses and government agencies adjust to the then once again new regulatory landscape. Similarly, some areas of EU funding and budgetary contributions might require temporary adjustments before the UK fully resumes its role as a contributing member state. And Chapter 35 might also cover legal continuity and dispute resolution mechanisms. The UK has diverged from EU law in many areas since Brexit, particularly in financial regulation, environmental policies, and trade agreements. Joining again would require a mechanism to determine how legal disputes are handled during the transition process. Would the UK need to recognize past European Court of Justice rulings retroactively? Would there be exemptions for specific policies that have already been changed? And these questions would need to be addressed in these final stages of the accession process. Another possible topic under Chapter 35 could be opt-outs or special arrangements, but don't get started on dreaming here. While the EU has made it clear that new members must adopt all EU laws, there have been minor cases where transitional arrangements were made to allow new members time to adjust. So not to skip it, just to time. For example, in previous enlargements, some countries were granted temporary derogations in areas like labor mobility or financial regulations. And the UK might attempt to negotiate a phased approach to certain aspects of EU membership, particularly in areas where full alignment would require significant changes to domestic policies. However, any such arrangements would require unanimous agreement from all EU member states, making them difficult to secure. Security and intelligence cooperation could also be addressed under this chapter. While the UK remains a strong NATO member and engages in security partnerships with the EU, Brexit led to reduced cooperation in intelligence sharing, law enforcement coordination, and counterterrorism efforts. We addressed this in a former chapter, but still. And if the UK were to join the EU again, there would need to be a lot of work to reintegrating into the frameworks, such as Europol, European Arrest Warrant System, and so on and so on. And ensuring a smooth reintegration into these systems would be critical for maintaining both UK and EU security interests. Another area that might reappear under Chapter 35 is public perception and political guarantees. Many EU countries remain cautious about the idea of the UK ever joining again after Brexit. Some leaders may demand political assurances that the UK will not attempt another exit in the near future. And this could involve requiring guarantees of long-term commitment or even constitutional changes that would make it more difficult for the UK to leave again in the future. And while this may seem extreme, some EU leaders would want reassurance that the UK is joining again with full commitment rather than treating membership as temporary or conditional. The timing of Chapter 35 discussions is also significant. Since it is addressed at the end of negotiations, it often becomes a catch-all for unresolved disputes. For the UK, this could mean that any remaining controversies, whether related to Brexit, trade policy or legal alignment, would need to be settled before final accession. And this makes it one of the most politically sensitive chapters, as it will be the final stage before a new accession treaty is signed. Ultimately, Chapter 35 is about closing all remaining gaps in the accession process and ensuring that the UK is fully prepared for EU membership. It is not a fixed set of rules, but rather a flexible framework used to address last-minute negotiations and transitional measures. For the UK, this could mean resolving complex political, economic and legal questions that do not fit into earlier chapters. It is a chapter that will require diplomatic skill, political commitment, and careful management of both domestic and European expectations. That's it for today's episode of BRITURN. And if you found this video informative, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. How do you see the UK handling the accession process overall? It's still the last episode. And do you think the completely changed world we see nowadays made this more likely that they might try it much earlier than everybody expected? I'm looking forward to your comments, and if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen.